Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am so very happy to have as my guest today Dr. Harry Stark. He began his career in psychology in order to develop supportive relationships and play a significant role in people's growth and achievement. He has been in private practice in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles since 2004. His clinical work has provided him with a breadth of experience and the ability to address a variety of concerns, including working with people who have developmental disabilities, mood disorders, chronic mental illness, addiction, and are going through life transitions. Dr. Stark teaches part-time at California State University in Northridge, which allows him exposure to the latest advances in the field of clinical psychology. Welcome, Dr. Stark. I am so glad you could join me today to discuss some communication and behavioral challenges that are often faced by a person with special needs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here to offer my 2 cents.
So before we get into the communication and behavioral issues, I have another question for you. As a doctor of psychology, how do you approach people with special needs from a therapeutic standpoint? Is it differently than you approach neurotypical people? And if so, how is it different?
Well, the hands-on approach, of course, will have to be different. Your expectations for how things are going to go has to be different. What's, I think, important to understand is that the basic structure remains the same because human beings have needs. We have emotional experiences, we have perceptions of things, and so that phenomena, that process, is universal. So in terms of treatment approaches, special needs versus neurotypical clients, I would say the differences are really more in the expectations of things in terms of how they get applied and how you mark progress. Fundamentally, the therapeutic approaches I prefer are the ones rooted in providing a new experience. Insight is very important. Awareness is very important. Certainly behavioral modifications are very important. But at the core, giving my clients a different experience, a healthy experience, has the ripple effect of not only changing how my clients see the people and the world around them, but it also changes how people see themselves. And we grow up, we're born into social environments, we grow up in a social environment, and those early experiences and the experiences we have throughout our lives really inform us and guide us in how we understand things, both external and internal. So therapeutically, the goal would be to provide a new or a healthier experience that can then translate into larger changes on the more foundational level of with anybody with whom I'm working. Now, with the special needs population, the same thing applies. We're providing new experiences, we're providing healthy experiences, and we just have to find ways to make sure those experiences are taken in, they're absorbed, and how they're understood in order to kind of hammer home the point or the new data that would be provided and developed. And so with a special needs population, that becomes a different type of challenge because you've got communication issues, you've got memory issues, you've got impulses that can interfere with integrating and applying new data, new experiences. And so you have to modify from that perspective. But it's important to know that the foundational goals and the basic structures remain the same.
Can you give me an example of one of those new and healthier experiences and the ripple effect that it might have?
Sure. So if I'm working with a neurotypical client who is experiencing, let's say, anxiety, that's a simple one. And so the client is experiencing anxiety. Maybe the anxiety is rooted in a fundamental sense of insecurity, inability to face challenges, uncertainty, maybe even a belief that a failure is going to lead to lifelong catastrophic consequences. The new experience for the neurotypical client would be doing something, having the person experience a situation where they confronted their anxiety and did something they normally avoid. And once they've done the thing, even if they fail, and oftentimes it's better if they fail, really going into the results and saying, what have you discovered? What did you notice? On a simplistic level, did the world fall apart? Did the earth spin off of its axis? Did the ground open up beneath you and swallow you whole? It's like, no. What else did you notice? Did you realize that you were breathing differently? Were there things you discovered in terms of how you were engaged or how you approached this anxiety-provoking situation? And through that process of really going into the experience, you create an awareness of the experience. And that awareness is part of how somebody will internalize it and revise their belief systems, revise their sense of confidence in themselves. So now take that same anxiety and put it in a special needs client whose fears can be just as real, just as impactful, just as isolating. To get the special needs client to face something in and of itself would be a challenge because maybe there are very real restrictions or there are more complex issues at play, but you still work towards the confrontation or the facing of the challenge. And because of possible language deficits or impairments, possible memory issues, possible issues with abstract thinking, you have to work harder to develop the awareness that the anxiety is transitory and that there are strengths that are developed. With some of my special needs clients, I'll work on social skills development, conversational skills, so that they can realize, oh, I can have a conversation. I can take part in something that I see other people doing very easily and be a member of the community, even if the community is just 2 or 3 people. And so it becomes, in those ways, more difficult. And we can look at other disorders, like addiction and trauma, depression for sure. And again, the same things apply. And it just requires a more tenacious, more kind of structured sometimes, or maybe just a more comforting easing into those new experiences.
Well, so it sounds to me like, as you said, the methodology is the same, basically facing the fear, the anxiety, whatever it is, and realizing that when you actually do face it and go through it, it's not as bad as you may have envisioned it to be in your imagination. But in terms of a person with special needs, the key to applying that, to me, it sounds like, is patience and persistence. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that seems very fair to say.
Let's move on to some of these behavioral and communication issues that we're going to be talking about. Sure. Let me ask you, when we are out and about in public with a person with special needs, very often we encounter ignorance, someone out in the general population who doesn't really know necessarily what is going on, let alone how to appropriately respond to it when they encounter it. So what, in your opinion, is the best way to handle ignorance when one encounters it in the general population? For example, someone who behaves rudely towards your child with special needs when you are out and about.
Well, I think a person has to prioritize what's the goal. If somebody is behaving rudely towards your child or the person with special needs for whom you are providing care, what's the goal? That's the first question, because the goal will dictate what you're going to do next. If your goal is to educate the general population so that they don't do this again, they don't act harmfully, even if it was non-malicious, just accidentally, then you would focus on the person who did the offense, who was behaving in a harmful way. I think, though, most people, the vast majority of people would agree, the goal is really to first and foremost attend to the needs of the special needs person. So I would say the priority is, when something happens, first and foremost, focus in on the special needs person. Try and make an assessment of what harm, if any, was done, what curiosity, what immediate urgency might need addressing. Is there an anxiety that's been provoked, a trauma that has been triggered, something that's going on that might need immediate stabilization? Once that's done, if the opportunity still is there, then by all means try and educate or develop some sense of reflection on the part of the person who did the offending behavior. But again, it's a judgment call. Sometimes trying to educate somebody who doesn't want to be educated can actually lead to a very volatile situation, and that's going to make things worse. So people have to put it to their own assessment, and these judgments are made in split seconds. When you're out in public, you really don't have a whole lot of time to figure it out.
Right.
But once you've stabilized or made just a triage of what any needs are for the special needs person, then you have that opportunity to kind of reflect and say, what am I going to do here? What is my goal? It's my goal to educate. Well, okay, then you'll follow through on trying to educate. And then it's just a question of what's the best way to educate.
And what is the best way to educate? How do you approach a person who, let's say it was a non-malicious event, and they said something out of ignorance that was hurtful, and you would want to approach that person in a way, obviously, hopefully, that would not trigger defensiveness on their part. So how would you suggest one approach the other person in that instance?
So here's where, not just my training and my experience of working with special needs population comes into play, but also an understanding of the neurology of stress. When somebody is stressed, their parts of their brain stop being available. The more stress, the less brain is available. And it's a much more complex discussion, and we probably have to do 3 or 4 more talks on this. But suffice to say, high stress, not a lot of thinking going on, more instinct, more intuition, and most people's instinct, intuition is going to be about self-protection.
Fight or flight kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what I like to do is I like to reduce the stress right away. I try and keep my voice calm, try and make eye contact, have a concerned and kind affect, and I'll frame things as, I'm sure you didn't mean anything wrong. I'm sure you are a nice person. I'm sure you would not want to harm anyone. Things like that. And then I would say, maybe you're not aware that saying X or doing Y had a consequence that I don't think you really wanted. And you should be alert that when you see somebody who has maybe an overt, kind of obvious presentation of having special needs, to think a little bit more about just being sensitive. Like some people, some special needs people have processing issues where loud noises, sudden movements, physical contact can have exponentially large reactions. And, just having the person be aware. Maybe they also should know that whatever the reaction was, possible they interpreted that reaction as some kind of an aggressive move, and to reframe that as, no, this is about self-protection. This person is trying to quiet a large noise, a very invasive sensation from physical contact, whatever it was, to just try and help the person understand that people with special needs process information differently. And something that you take, whoever the person is, something that this person takes as just an off-the-cuff, excusable, easygoing action, like a touch or a noise or even a joke of some sort, really can have large consequences. And that's about, already I've probably spoken too much than what I would do to somebody else in real life, but just that nature of a response.
Well, that's actually excellent advice. But let's take that a step further. And what do you think would be the best way to handle inappropriate behavior from the special needs individual themselves, both in public and private settings? Let's say whatever it was, whatever event that triggered that behavior, that forced them into that overwhelming mode that they're in, that they're then trying to deal with. How would you suggest handling that? And as I said, both in public and private settings, I imagine the approach might be different or maybe not.
Well, the differences are going to mostly be volume, I think. There will be other elements of difference for sure, but I think the main difference is going to deal with volume in terms of, just how urgent, how loud, somebody's going to respond. Let's go back to what I was saying about stress. More stress, less thinking. Somebody with special needs, their brain is wired differently, but they have a brain. And just the vast majority are going to have the same structural responses to stress. Hormones are going to be released, parts of the brain are going to go offline. So what I would say is when the special needs person is doing something that is inappropriate or dangerous, you want to take an approach as much as possible to reduce the stress. Be calm, be engaging, make eye contact if that's appropriate given the person's particular needs, use a soothing voice or create space. And in order to keep the brain online, we want as much of the prefrontal cortex available to contemplate what's going on, to take in the data that's being presented. So first and foremost, you want to engage in a calm, supportive manner. Now, I fully acknowledge, and this doesn't have to apply only to special needs people, this applies to anybody. Sometimes something's being done and there is no time, there is no appropriateness to be calm in the moment. Some responses have to be urgent, efficient, quick, and definitive. Because
Right.
safety always comes out as rule number one. That's number one goal. We got to be safe. Nothing can happen that's helpful if you're not safe. So that's just a caveat that I offer. But once safety is developed, then you want to reduce the stress. You've got to be careful of shame, embarrassment, because special needs people experience shame and embarrassment just in the same way we do. Neurotypical people experience shame and embarrassment, and that's going to trigger the fight or flight. Well, a special needs person is also going to experience shame and embarrassment, and that's going to trigger fight or flight. So keeping the tone calm, relaxed, engaged, being aware, trying to look for the nonverbal cues that tell you that the special needs person is calming, is self-soothing, or being soothed by whatever the revised environment is, and then try to educate, try to explain the sequence of events and also the unintended consequences. Try and build a sense of understanding for the structure, and, if possible, try and build an emotional, empathic awareness for what's going on, and to offer choices, to offer guidance if the choices are not appropriate. And saying, yeah, I know this feels good, but it's not really good. And here's another way of doing things that is actually going to be better. And depending on, how far out the abstract thinking can go in anticipating a sequence of events, then you work with the special needs person to try and get them on board with a better way of responding to whatever the stimulus was.
So again, based on what you said, safety first. Obviously, we want to make sure that the person is safe, whether it is in a public or private setting. Once that's been established, so let's give an example. Let's say that you're out in public somewhere, whether it's in a shopping mall or wherever it is, and something has triggered a state of overwhelm with your child with special needs, and they have begun to scream, to lash out, to run, to whatever it is that their trigger is, their response is. What would be the first thing to do? Would you immediately remove them from the environment? Would you try to calm them first? What would be your advice of how to handle that situation?
So here's where, people who provide care for people with special needs really have a task that I think the general public just doesn't appreciate. Because removing the special needs person from the situation might actually make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Vigorous, quick physical contact could actually create an exponentially larger explosion of behavior. If safety requires removal, then it doesn't matter about the explosion. You got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If the train is coming down the tracks, you don't want to sit there and calm until the person's ready to step off the tracks. You got to get off the tracks. It's just that's just a no. That's step one.
That's a no-brainer. Yeah.
That's the no-brainer,
Right.
But if that's not necessary, like you're in a mall, you're in a store, some kind of a public forum.
Mm-hmm.
If you know the special needs person's response to some of these things, like sudden movements, quick grabbing of arms or carrying or something like that, if you know that's going to create a larger explosion, I would say it's preferable to stay in the moment. And this is what I meant about not, a lot of people don't appreciate what the care providers go through. That's hard. It's hard to stay in a public forum and try to calm, soothe, and develop a stability, get back to baseline before and then move away or then deal with whatever the problem was. Because that can be embarrassing. That can create the care provider's own fight or flight responses. And so that's another part to the mix that needs to be understood, which is why care providers themselves have to be very alert to what their own triggers are, what their own needs are, and then to figure out how to sometimes just be okay suppressing managing their own need. That's very reflexive, very intuitive, in order to provide the need for the person with special needs or provide the care.
Right. And not an easy task at all, that's for sure.
No. And if people, neurotypical people want to find a way to empathize with that, there are plenty of kind of stereotypical situations of parents of 4-year-olds and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds where the kid starts throwing a tantrum and they kind of know this is going to be ugly, this is going to be bad. But in order for me to do what's really best, I can't just grab and suddenly move the kids. And people would have an understanding of that. And more often than not, the general public will just move along because generally that's what the public likes to do. They don't want to notice, or rather they don't want to get involved. They don't want to engage, and they'll give space. They'll just create space. We could say that's a sad commentary on society, or it's just whatever about society, but it is what it is. And, take heart in that there are ways for people to empathize, that, the care provider is not going to suffer the kind of stigma they're worried about, because most people really are just going to want to move on.
Right. So it's the embarrassment is more of an imagined thing, really. Like you say, most people aren't really interested in becoming involved. They may notice and then just move on and just allow you to deal with whatever you're dealing with without really anything more than that. So that's absolutely an important thing to remember, very important thing to remember. So, all right, let's move on to another topic here. How to talk to an individual with special needs about serious life issues like death, like divorce, like, things that we all have to deal with, and it's hard enough, for those of us who are neurotypical to deal with them. But how would you broach these subjects to a person with special needs? Obviously, you'd approach a child differently than you'd approach an adult with special needs, depending on their level of ability to understand and so forth. But what is your recommendation on that topic?
Well, you're hitting the nail squarely on the head when you say, what is their ability to understand? And that's what you're looking to assess first and foremost. I have clients, some of my clients, for instance, with Down syndrome, who, there are blanket assumptions made. Oh, the person with Down syndrome, they're not going to be able to do abstract thinking. They're not going to be able to have memory. They're not going to have this. They're not going to have that. And my approach has always been, yes, these are areas of obvious, stereotypical difficulty, challenge. But we have to figure out what the actual limits are. Where are those boundaries, established in terms of ceilings of functioning for each individual? So just like you would with a child who's neurotypical and you want to talk about or have to talk about death or divorce or anything that's stressful, life-altering, you have to figure out what does that person truly understand? Because you're going to be talking about a lot of abstract concepts. So, for instance, with divorce, I think you have to look at the basic needs of any child. Actually, I would say this is not just for divorce, any topic. Any child would want to know and needs to know that there's going to be a stable environment, that there's still going to be dinner on the table at night. There's still going to be a roof over the head. There's still going to be clothes to wear. You have to provide that sense of stability, which again goes back to reducing stress, so that the brain is calm and can take in whatever the data is. So if there's divorce, it may seem cliche, but to emphasize, you're still loved, you're still cared for, people are still here, they're going to take care of you, they're going to help you out, there will always be somebody you can look to. Maybe you want to have a list of the people available. You may want to show a list of a plan. Here's what's going to happen next. Give the special needs person something concrete that they can see, the world is not tossed into chaos right now. The world is still very stable. It's changing the way it looks, and it can feel chaotic. But now I can see, no, there is some stability here. So giving the person something they can count on, some kind of a plan. Dealing with death becomes more complex because while there are certainly pragmatic aspects of death, there are abstract aspects of death as well. And you have to look at, the culture of the family, the culture of the care provider. What is the history of what death means from a cultural perspective, not just ethnicity, not just religion, but just the individual's life experiences, what he or she grew up with in regards to dealing with death. And the research has been pretty conclusive that as we age, the way we think about death, the way we respond to death, has so much more to do with our early experiences in life, even in childhood, of discussions, going to funerals, seeing somebody who is at the end stages of their lives, and how it's discussed, how it's understood, then that's what you got to do. And I don't want to give any kind of specific guidance because everybody, I think, has their own way of wanting to understand it. And you just have to find a way to communicate that understanding and be open to questions. Sometimes the special needs person is not, they can get overwhelmed. And they're going to say, I don't have any questions, or I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Right.
And you just establish, okay, however, you can always ask a question anytime. And even if you don't ask a question, maybe we'll come back and talk about this tomorrow. Or maybe we'll talk about it. Maybe you'll have some questions then. So you have to not just empower the special needs person to seek answers for questions, but you sometimes have to help them ask questions by giving space, giving time.
That's true really for anybody, though, is sometimes people are just not ready to talk about it, and just assuring them that, well, that's okay, and when you are ready, I'm here, and maybe I'll check in with you again later,
Absolutely. So that's the larger message here, which is their needs are special in that how their needs are provided is different. But they have the same needs as the neurotypical person.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and speaking of the same needs as a neurotypical person, what about romantic relationships and people with special needs? A lot of people mistakenly think that those with special needs aren't interested or aren't capable, and in many instances that's just not true. So what is your opinion about that subject?
Well, I would say unless there's something biologically impairing the special needs person, their needs are absolutely no different. Absolutely no different from the neurotypical person.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, how they understand their needs and how they express them will be different. So step one, just recognize that you can't turn a blind eye to that topic. It's a part of life. If you would expect it, if you've got a child and you imagine that child is going to date and whatever, well, why wouldn't you imagine that a special needs child would? Now, that doesn't mean you just say, okay, here are the keys to the car, go and have fun. But you just have to understand the need is there, the desire is there, the want is there. Plus, they're seeing a lot. I mean, how do vast majority of people learn about, romantic relationships? From the media, from what they see in magazines, on television, in movies, in video games for that matter. Not just what they see in real life around them within their family of origin or the people around them in the society around them. So it's something you can't ignore. You have to allow that it's real. You have to recognize it. And then, like you would with anybody, you talk about concerns. I think you got to be honest and communicate that honesty in a way that the special needs person can understand it. You can say, I'm afraid. I'm worried what might happen to you. I'm worried that you might get involved in something that's too big for you or that you're not going to know how to manage. And you talk about that. You don't want to make relationships something to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. So you find a way to say, this is important. It's, big. I know of, many special needs people who have developed relationships. Probably the hardest thing for them to deal with is rejection. And, what is that? It's first off, I don't know about you, but I've had my heart broken in the past, and it's painful. It hurts. And then, somebody can say, it'll be all right. Don't worry, Harry. There'll be another, you'll have another friend, another girlfriend, whatever. And in those moments, like, no, the world is ending right now.
Right. That's not what you want to hear. Right.
Right. And then, but over time, you start to realize, okay, things can work out and you can develop new relationships. Well, with special needs people, that experience can be, by an order of hundreds more intense. The belief that the pain will never go away can be more certain, more rock solid. And there can be deficits in terms of the ability to explain what the experience is. So that's something else to keep in mind. And so you got to find ways to validate the desire and look for ways to kind of guide and facilitate engagement and deal with certain realities. There are going to be some people who don't want to be in a relationship with a special needs person, and then there will be some people who do. And there are even more controversial topics that some people bring up, but I think are important to discuss. Just somebody who has a sex drive and doesn't have an outlet, and to recognize that sex drive is going to express itself in some way, and you want to find ways to do that where it doesn't endanger anybody. I have a particular client who's got strange fetishes, and it's about finding ways to redirect so that the client doesn't get in legal trouble, and yet validate, okay, this is something that is attractive to you. It turns you on. And so let's figure out how this can get expressed, but in a healthy way, in a legal way, in a safe way.
Well, that begs the question then, how intrusive do you get? And I use that word from the standpoint with a neurotypical child who is entering adolescence or through adolescence and is dating and is engaging in romantic relationships. I mean, they unless they come to you and say, "Hey, mom or dad, can I have your advice?" Basically, they don't want to hear from you. They don't want you butting into their business, right? So how would you approach that in terms of obviously the person with special needs, again, depending on their level of functioning, they would want and or require some additional guidance and, if I, again, to use the word intrusion into that aspect of their lives to make sure that it is safe and legal and healthy and all of those things. So what is the best way to handle that, handle that intrusion into their lives without it feeling like an intrusion?
Well, I like the way you phrase the question, because you ask what's the best way, because that acknowledges that there is no really good way.
Right.
It's just simply the best way. And you have to, I approach things from the perspective of, I don't want to have any regrets. I don't want to kick myself for not having had a discussion with someone and then see that they did something and that maybe that discussion might have changed things or influenced things. So you have to be vigilant. You have to be alert to, where is the special needs person looking? Do you notice when you're walking into a public forum, are they staring, leering? Sometimes it can make people uncomfortable. Or are they just kind of giving different affective responses when they're around people of the opposite sex or the same sex? Doesn't matter. And look for those indicators that maybe they're thinking about something, maybe they're responding to something. And even if you don't see that, just choose what would be age appropriate for a neurotypical person. I mean, kids today are getting discussions about sex at way earlier ages than I had when I was in school. And so you can't wait. And you got to learn how to tolerate being the intrusive adult. You just have to do it, because it's better to have the discussion, put it on the table, make it a topic that can and will be discussed at future dates. And notice how I use the plural, because it's not just a one-off kind of thing. And you just have to shoulder the burden of being the intrusive parent or care provider. There's no way around it.
Well, that's well said. Well said, because I agree with you. There is no comfortable way to do it. You just have to do it, because, again, you want to make sure that they are safe, that they are healthy, that they are legal, and that, all those boxes are checked. Moving on to another topic that is a topic that we all have to deal with in the special needs community, and is really a universal issue and problem, I think. What is your opinion about the lack of government resources for this particular community? That's one of the reasons, by the way, that I created this Patreon page and this series of podcasts, and will continue to do so. It's about not only the lack of government resources, but the lack of a knowledge base on how to access and use the resources that are out there. So many times I've found, I can't tell you how many parents I've spoken to, every time they go out there to address a need or an issue or a concern, they have to reinvent the wheel, because not only can they not find the resource they're looking for, but how, if the resource exists, how to access it and utilize it and communicate about it is just, it's just an overwhelming maze of phone calls and websites and pamphlets and information that often you'll talk to 3 different people on the same topic and get 3 totally different answers and not know which one is correct. So now that I've said my piece, what is your opinion about this situation and how to handle that?
Well, my opinion about the situation can be summed up in one word: stinks. The situation stinks. It's really horrible. There's no way to, sugarcoat it. There is no. It's horrible. It stinks. What you describe is so familiar to me. I had to learn a lot about this in process. When I first got my license, my first job, I'm working at a clinic, and I had already worked with the special needs population for over a year before I got to that clinic. And I'm doing an assessment on somebody, and I can just see right away, got a developmental disability. And it occurs to me that the guy is an adult. He's in his late 20s, and he's had legal problems. And his mother died a decade prior. His father is very advanced in age and unhealthy, and is the sole care provider. And as I start to kind of dig a little deeper, I find out there are no government services. There are no community services, no kind of county, government, state, whatever services that this person has been connected to. And it was abhorrent. That was back at a time where identifying kids with special needs in school wasn't so great. In fact, I would go so far as to say it was criminal. But that was my entree into the process of getting this person connected with the regional center, connected with different kind of social services, et cetera, and meeting blockades at every single step. Probably the number one problem is funding. Organizations like the regional center, I have no data other than my own experiences to look to on this, but based on my own experiences and based on things I've encountered with other people, it just seems like their first word that they learn when you go to work at the regional center is no.
Unfortunately.
Because they have no money, and they have no money, therefore they have no resources, therefore they have not this, not that. I've got clients who are in the regional center and are looking to get more hours for one-to-one assistance, and they get authorized, oh yeah, you can do that, we'll give you the more hours, but then getting it actually implemented becomes a task and a half. So my assessment of the situation is that it stinks. It's mostly due to money, also due to a lack of coordination between different government and different organizational services. I think one of the best things a person can do to deal with what will always be a difficult process is you got to find an advocate. You got to find somebody who's been around the block a few times, knows all the phone numbers, knows the different organizations, and there are some good organizations out there. Jay Nolan the Supportive Living Group is good. There are some good organizations out there, and you need somebody to run point. And I would say taking a medical model would be appropriate. If you've got complex health issues, you got a cardiac issue, you got a liver issue, you got a kidney issue, you got a rheumatology issue, you want some physician, somebody who's kind of going to oversee the larger health care for the individual, and that person's going to coordinate the services, coordinate the treatment. Well, the same thing with somebody with special needs. I think it's really beneficial. Get someone who knows the ropes, knows where all of these different agencies are, knows how to maneuver the minefields that they present in order to kind of make it difficult to get the services, or that just makes it difficult to get the services. And that's kind of your best bet. And then lots of tenacity, lots of patience, lots of a willingness to recognize that organizations are going to move at a snail's pace. Getting rapid responses is very difficult to get. And so you also have to look for your own support, your own kind of care in dealing with that stress. And maybe that means, support groups. Maybe that means, somebody attending to the care provider's own emotional needs as they deal with these things. But you just have to be prepared for the way the situation is now. You have to be prepared for a very long, steep uphill climb. That being said, it can change. It can get improved. More funding can be provided, more organization, taking disparate organizations, disparate agencies, and bringing them under a more unifying umbrella. That can be very helpful, but money first and foremost is kind of needed. So it's difficult, it's challenging, and I wouldn't sugarcoat it. I wouldn't want anybody to believe, oh, it's no problem, don't worry, you just write a letter, make a phone call, send an email, and everything will be okay.
No, it seldom works that way. And your suggestion to get an advocate, I think, is an excellent one. And certainly, as you said, tenacity and persistence, and basically learning to not take no for an answer, which is a challenge for a lot of people and a lot of parents who are already overwhelmed and exhausted, and also for people for whom English is not their first language. It can be particularly challenging to navigate through that maze.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. And, you bring up the language issue. That's something that a lot of people can, experience their own shame, their own embarrassment, and, not wanting to push through because they feel inadequate. Inappropriately, they feel that way, but that can happen. And just the idea that the message can be somehow you're on your own, when in fact you're not. There are resources out there. You just really have to be tenacious in going after them.
Well, before we end today, Dr. Stark, is there anything in summation or about any of the topics we've discussed that you would like to add that I haven't asked or that you feel is important for our listeners to know?
Well, just to restate maybe more concisely, that when there's a person identified who has special needs, that is life-changing for the people who are going to provide the care. And it's a lifelong issue. And so you need to make sure there's support in the immediate sense, support for the person with special needs, support for the person or people providing the care, and to do whatever is possible to convey and develop a sense of hope and empathy so that the long, arduous tasks ahead can be met with courage and strength. That's about as concise as I think I'm capable of being.
And again, well said. I think those are very, very wise words. And if our listeners have questions or want to know more, how can they contact you?
Well, there's certainly the phone number for my practice, which is 818-825-2743. That's 818-825-2743. I also have email, Dr. Harry Stark, Dr. Harry Stark, @hotmail.com.
Okay, and DrHarrystark @hotmail.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, great.
I apologize for not spelling it out.
Well, yeah, I mean, nowadays we have lots of spellings of all these different names, so I just wanted to clarify to make sure people got it down correctly. And I want to thank you so much, Dr. Stark, for joining me today and for the incredibly helpful information that you've shared.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And I do hope you will join me again sometime.
Not a problem.
All right. Well, I also want to thank our listeners for spending a part of their day with us. I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.